Welcome to 2023 in BIMXC. It's the first meeting that we have. And as I mentioned, we have a full house, really cool presentations on model management. Without further ado, we have Dan Warren with our presentation on his tip today on how to export information out to Excel and view in Power BI. That is an information-packed tip, so I'm gonna let him get started. How are you today, Dan?
I guess it would work a lot better if I unmuted myself. There we go. Technology, am I right? I love it.
Oh, goodness. We can only get started.
Okay, yeah. So what I wanted to cover today in our quick tip is just an introduction to how do we get data out of Excel, and how do we get data out of Revit and start playing with that in Power BI? Because once you get used to the data, and I'll cover some of the snags you run into along the way. Once you're in Power BI, you can start to interrogate a lot of your data. So like this is a little dashboard I made, and I'm using the tried and true Revit sample model that everyone knows. So the way this works is this is like the lowest tier way of getting data out of Revit, and it's just a straight schedule export. The first trick you got to know when you're setting up your schedule is you want your schedule to look as close to the data that you want to process in Excel. So if it's numbers and you have to do float, you want to adjust your units so that the float's correct on your numbers, or rounding, things like that. If you're pulling like family and family name, sometimes you want to use those family and family type. Sometimes you want to use those pieces of information separately. So you'd want to schedule them separately. That way you minimize the amount of data massaging you have to do in Excel, because that's where you kind of have to manipulate the data, or it's the easiest place to manipulate the data before you go to Power BI, I have found. So I just created a simple schedule, and in my schedule, I've got my basic room information. I do find it is very helpful to turn off your title if you're going to be exporting this out to Excel, so you can have dedicated views for this. And then the process is very complicated. You come up to File and go to Export, and then I don't know why the wheel doesn't work there, but then you come down here to where's my reports, and I pick my schedule. And if the schedule is active, it will actually select this schedule automatically. And it will export it out to a CSV, which if you'd like to see that, here is the CSV in Excel. So I've got all my data set up, ready to go. So every time if I do that export again, it'll just overwrite the CSV, and my data then becomes quasi-live or semi-automatic. So I have this data in Excel. This isn't really where I want to do my manipulation. So what I'm going to do is go to Power BI. And if you've never used Power BI before, the way you pull data into it is you go to Get Data up here, and I'm going to get data from a CSV. And I can see right there, there's my department schedule. And I've also put out a furniture schedule. And I'm going to show you how to tie the room and the furniture to the room in the Revit file. So then you can schedule department furniture and stuff like that. So once you pull this information in, you're going to have these data sets like this. So this is just basically viewing my Excel file. And then I turn around, and this is where I can create the relationships in my data. So when I have my CSVs pulled in, here's my department schedule, simple CSV export, and a room furniture schedule, which has room number and room name, which I also have over here, my room number and name. And you literally just drag and drop to create data connections. And this helps build your data model. Once that's set up, you now have all the connections you need to start creating a report. So for example, if I wanted to recreate this report right here, this sum of area by level and department, all I have to do is tell Power BI that I want to create a new, sorry, Zoom's in the way, where's my tree map. And then all I have to do is start dragging and dropping data in there. So I want to drop in there my area and my department. And there we go. So now I have a breakdown of all my different departments. Oh, sorry, I did this backwards. This would be values need to go down here and departments need to go up here. There we go. So now I have a breakdown of all my departments and their area. What I really like about this is you can layer information. So in this tree, I have layered the level information. So if I want to look at circulation for level 3, I can click on that and it drills down all my other information in my report. So it becomes a live dashboard. And then for the furniture, same thing, because I tied the furniture, the room the furniture's in to the department information by tying it to the room name and the room number, I can now figure out exactly how many of each piece of furniture is in each department in my building. So if you'd like, I've put all of this together in a zip file. So you have my Excel sheet, you have the data set, you have actually a Dynamo script that creates the CSV as well. I've got that zipped and put on, and the link is in the mural for your download next to my name on the left. So there you go. There's my quick tip.
That was amazing. And I feel like the barrier to entry to that is incredibly low, right? I've played a little bit with Power BI, definitely not to that extent. And I would definitely not be able to give a tutorial as well as you just did. But I feel like most of the information that you need is pretty much on YouTube or like on the Power. It's a pretty easy interface to deal with.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of the college of YouTube.
Yeah, but Power BI is great. Would you say that you picked it up pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I literally started playing with it 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So.
And you're a whiz at the tutorial even.
No whiz. But I do
Well,
think it is a comfort thing. Once you get your hands on it, you start playing with it, you can really go a long way, which is why I'm giving away that template for free, just so it'll get people to open it up and play with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That was incredibly informative. I feel like not many people really know even that you can export data that way. So fantastic. Thank you. And so next up, we have Jason Kunkel from CAD Microsystems. He's going to be showing the BIM interoperability tools.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, and kudos to saying it correctly the first time. I have to pause at every syllable when I do it myself. It's a tough one, and spelling's even worse. So yeah, thanks. We're going to talk about the tools in general. Specifically, we're going to spend some time in the model checker for Revit. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a quick PowerPoint to go over, just mostly to keep me on track, and I'll hop in Revit for just a second or two. So let me remember how to use Zoom, and hopefully everybody can see the slide deck at this point. I got a thumbs up. Awesome. So with that, model checker for Revit. Real quick background. It is an Autodesk Revit add-in. It is part of the BIM interoperability tools. The BIM interoperability tools are the COBie extension. It's the model checker. It is the standardized data tool, which is the renamed classification manager if you're used to that. And then there's the equipment data tool and the spatial data tool. So in terms of kind of the workflow of like organizing data, validating data, and exporting data, the model checker is in the middle there with that whole validation of data portion. It runs in Revit. It runs on an active model. It runs on linked models. You can select a bunch of models. You can validate your elements properties in there. It has exportable reports for Excel and HTML. We'll do another little callback to Power BI in a couple slides. What it does at its core is it collects elements based on criteria. And then depending on your check, it'll either give you a list of those elements, the number of those elements, and it can even be very judgmental. And it can say, well, I found some, you have failed this check. Or I didn't find some, you have failed this check. Or vice versa, I found some, you passed. And that way. So you can go very judgy and do pass fail, or you can just make it more informative and have a count and list or a count of it as well. Like I said, it likes to grab elements, and it likes to kind of quantify them based on the parameters and the information within those parameters. And that hopefully I can make it a little more clear as we're going through. What it is not, I'd like to point this out specifically. For the most part, it is not going to check relationships between elements. There's a little bit in there where you can drill into host elements and look at parameters of those compared to the element itself. But this is not a design checker. This is not looking for clearances. This is not going to make sure all your hallways are, 8 feet wide. It's not going to make sure every room that's called office has the proper number of egresses. This is going to look at my door, and it's going to look at stuff in that door. It's going to look at my room. It's going to look at stuff in my room. It's going to look at my views, and it can look at the properties and parameters within the views as well. So we think about the model and the model elements, but there are ways to check annotation standards as well, simply because everything in Revit, is structured as family type instance with parameters in there also. Some of the typical checks we start off with are things like, does my equipment or my room have the right parameters associated with it? Are those parameters filled in? The value in those filled in parameters, do they match certain requirements, certain format, or are they matching a list of predefined values? We can check naming conventions. There are a series of checks in there, more model fidelity items like warnings, links, duplicated elements, in-place families, and things like that. So overall, it really is about validating standards, whether those are BIM and data deliverable standards, or just kind of your own firm standards about how you want Revit to be used. Its good, close, dearest friend is the Model Checker Configurator. It is a standalone executable. It installs with the interoperability tools. It can be launched from Revit, or you can go track down the exe in the install folder and drag a shortcut to your desktop if you want. But this is where the checks are actually made. And there's 3 ways checks are made. There are some pre-built checks, and I'll show where those are. There is a wizard. And I think the wizard is a great way to start getting used to the model checker. The wizard's going to get your checks probably about 80% of the way there. They always need a little bit of tweaking, but it's supposed to just walk you through. I'm looking at walls. I want to look at height of walls. If my walls are too tall, I want it to fail. That's the kind of thing the wizard's going to step you through. And then it's going to give you what we call an advanced check, and you can go in and kind of tweak and nudge there. Or once you get used to it, once you kind of know how it's structured, you can go straight to the advanced editor and make your own individual checks through the advanced editor as well. Wildcards are supported through regular expression, so that's fun to learn. But when you're done with that, basically you get a check set file. It's an XML file. It's completely open in all your favorite notepad or text editors, and that was by design. So if you need to go make like a batch huge change to everything, like you just rename your parameter, instead of opening up all your 30 checks in the configurator, open up a new notepad, do a find replace. We will sometimes make like one standard check to make sure it works, like with one category. And then we'll maybe like take the pieces and parts, put it in Excel, and then we'll make a bunch of checks, in Excel there, and then copy and paste them back right into the XML file. The last thing I like to talk about, this is not part of the set, but I always like to give a shout out to the Revit lookup tool. If you are going to start making complicated checks, this is just, I can't live without it. This is how you look under the hood of the Revit database, because sometimes you think you know how the parameter is formatted, how Revit wants to handle the parameter. The Revit database, it can surprise you when you're least expecting it to surprise you. And the lookup tool does a great job of saying, no, this is the name of the parameter, or maybe this is the built-in parameter name that we're looking for, or this is the data type, and this is how the database stores it. And the configurator and the model checker prefer to speak on Revit's terms more than the UI terms when things get complicated. All right, here's my reminder slide to start the demo. So Dan, man, we're working on the same project. It's amazing. It's so cool.
Every single one of my YouTube videos are in this. So we're right there with you guys.
Fantastic. Beautiful. So here's the BIM interoperability tools tab. You can grab this from the desktop app or manage.autodesk.com. Here are all the tools that get installed with it. This is the little model checker chunk here. And to set it up, you say set up. What I'm doing now is I'm associating a check set with this model, and I'm turning on and off different checks that I want to run. So these are kind of the last ones I use. I can hit my browse button to go get a check set I made. Down here is what we call the public library. This is all web hosted. These are all publicly available. You can use these, you can download them, you can dissect them, whatever you want. But I'm going to grab the 2023 best practices, say okay. This is the structure. So these are all the different sections and groupings of checks that we run. Excuse me. If I want, I can just turn off a whole slew, right? I don't care about my external files now. So I'm just going to turn off that. None of those checks are going to run. If I want to get more granular, I can click on the section. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to turn off some of these individuals. Like I'm going to turn off loadable families because that check takes a long time. Then I don't want to waste our time on the call here. I'm going to come down here to model elements also, and I'm going to turn off duplicate modeled elements. That takes a long time as well. I think mirrored does too. So just to speed things up, turn off some of these checks. When I'm done, I say save and close. That doesn't run the model checker. Again, all that does is tell this model, these are the checks I want to run from this check set. When I'm ready to roll, I hit my run button. I can add more models. I can select links if I want. I'm just going to say report, run report, cross my finger that it is going to be pretty fast. And there you go. We ran 97 checks in, I mean, that was 15-ish seconds or something. I mean, if you compare the time that you could spend manually going through that and validating all that information, it's night and day, of course. But we get a little pass fail here, 60%, sad red. There's no way to adjust that. We just kind of picked some numbers which sounded good. Try not to take it personally. But I can expand these and I can get all of the different information. You can see this is just kind of a list information. So here's how big my model is. Here's how many warnings I have in here. We did not run that loadable families check. So that's why that's got the little Ghostbuster symbol. Let me come down here. We failed on levels and grids somewhere. My levels and grids are on the wrong work set. This is not a work shared model. So I probably shouldn't have run that check. That's kind of a false negative. I'm not sure how else to, is that right? False, negative, positive, whatever. But we get a little summary of a report. So we get our check. I can export this to Excel from right here. I can export to HTML. But if I'm running it through Revit, and if I find one that I can use properly, yeah, there you go. If I'm referring to an instance, I can just click on the little magnifying glass here, and it's going to do the whole, can't find a view, let me find a view. It's going to take me to that element, and I can just immediately run that and fix it up from here. I can drag this over to the other monitor, keep working on it over there if I need to. Let me cancel that puppy. And there's that. Say close, make some changes, make some updates to my model, run the report again. And the latest report is always accessible here in View Report. So this is saved in the model. That configuration is saved in the model. Excuse me. And so whoever opens up this specific model is going to see it. Its cousin, just really quick, just 2 minutes here in the model checker. This is what this looks like. You don't have to have Revit open to use it. It will run by itself. It doesn't know Revit versioning, so make sure you write your check specifically for whatever version of Revit you're in. That's basically around categories. Some categories don't exist across the board. But working down at the bottom, here's where I build that structure. I can make headings, I can make subsections, and this is where I can kind of turn off groups of checks. We see most folks break this up by like discipline or maybe phase. After that, these are the pre-built checks, and this is basically we have very little customization on here. You can see we have a list of object styles, length of CAD elements. This is where I can get the file size information is here as well. These take a couple API steps to collect and organize the data. Next one up is my wizard. So you can see we've got some just questions here. It's going to fail if it finds this. It's going to fail if it doesn't. Okay, it's going to fail if it finds this. I'm looking for model elements. I want to look for architectural elements. I want it to check for walls and maybe doors. And we say continue. I want to add filters. So this is how this walks it through. And then when it's done, it's going to bring me up and give me a check here in the advanced check builder. And then this is where I can go and just kind of manually go in and tweak or build it from scratch if I want to. Give it a name, give it a description, and then I will add a series of filters, which really takes the entire model and drills it down until it finds the elements that match this criteria that I'm building. And either, again, it lists, or it says those are bad, you're failing, or those are good, you pass. We could spend gobs of time on here. You can get really in the weeds here, but obviously the configurator, this is for just a handful of people at your firm. They're going to be experts on the configurator. They make the checks. They send it out to everybody else and go from there. And I won't say my changes. All right, real quick, back to wrapping up this part. My wake up, etc. I had to look up how to spell that.
I would not have guessed that's how you spelled it, but you don't come to me for spelling. So.
Because I just did ETC period. I'm like, that's not to look good.
Totally.
I had to look it up. Anyway. Dashboards. Dan talked about dashboards just a second ago. This is a great way to kind of get different types of information organized in a different way. We can't get the same kind of relationship data that Dan was building. So a combo of the two, I think, would be awesome in the same dashboard. And you can make those references and those connections. When I export to Excel, it knows its element ID. It can know its category. So it knows a lot of that Revit stuff in Excel. But these are sample dashboards that are available on the Interoperability Tools website. You can just grab, kick around. These are just starter ones to kind of let people play around with, but it is a great way to kind of get consistent visual reports out of stuff. These are some of the wackier sample checks. I don't just think it's about, are all of my walls 3 feet tall or higher? We're looking for things. Are there crop boundaries in all of my elevation views? Are all my DW links set to current view only? Those are still parameters in elements in Revit. So the model checker loves to check that kind of thing.
I could see this being great to make sure that certain company standards are being met in terms of content, right? Like that you're actually using your content in the way that we anticipate and not bringing stuff in from like Revit City.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And if it's making sure all your parameters are attached to the right categories, things like that. It's not just about making sure the data is passed off correctly to the owners. It's about that internal stuff too. We've got a public library. These are all check sets that are available. Like I said, you can download them through the configurator. You can open a notepad. You can open and tweak them, do whatever you want with them. Most of these the CAD team made, but we made them, especially if you can see, if there's other organizations involved, we made them with those groups. We reached out to them, asked their permission. Some points they asked us. And then we reviewed their BIM standards, and then we built these check sets so they align with what they want and they need.
A few questions for you.
Oh, yeah.
And one that I had also, and maybe you're going to get to, is this something that you can automate?
Hey, look.
Scripting.
All right. Beautiful. That was perfect. There is an API, so if you want to build your own, application to Visual Studio, you can call it. There is scripting functionality too, which, real quick, what it does is basically you just take a text file and you kind of write little shortcut commands. You stick that in a certain place, and then you tell Windows, not the alarm thing, the task thing. You tell Windows like 1 a.m. open Revit. If Revit has the model checker installed, it will first look to that one location for that text file. If it finds that text file, it's going to open that model, open that check set, export your checks, close the model. Open the next model, run your checks, export the check set, close your model. So you can script all that up.
So any thoughts on maybe like the future of having this as a cloud-based solution where you could have the dashboards and things like that all accessible?
Okay, so awesome question. I never know what I can share, what I can't share. We work with AutoCAD, or we work with Autodesk directly.
Totally get it.
There is
do not make any buying decisions. Safe harbor.
Yes,
thank you, Dan.
Don't buy your stocks on that.
Do not make any buying decisions based off of what Jason says in the rest of his presentation.
Yeah.
Even though it's free.
The cloud version exists. There is a cloud version. It is currently in limited release. Kind of an invite-only thing. If you want to do some Autodesk University searching, you may find some folks talking about it over the last couple of years. One of those guys might be this guy. If you want to look for my name. But it does exist. We're very excited about it. It will go and it works with your, Vincent 360, your ACC models, same check set, same engine, same exports, just way easier to kind of script and, schedule along the way. So we're hoping it'll be kind of made available this year, but yeah, do not go and change your 401k portfolio based on this information at all. So last slide I got, here's some resources. So interoperability.autodesk.com.
And the link is in the mural, of course.
Awesome sauce. Those Power BI samples, some other samples you can download there. There are links to the AKN pages. There's links to YouTube there, but we do have an AKN section. If you go to YouTube and search for BIM interoperability tools, we have a channel with videos on this one and all other ones. I'd like to put regex101.com down there. If you're building regular expressions, that's where I always go. And then every so often our team blogs about some of the kind of wackadoodle ones we're making for the model checker on our own blog there. So
Really, really cool stuff. Tons of questions coming in. One last one. Do you see clients starting to require this stuff? Whether that's, large campus style projects, or, I would see it probably with, multi-building type of campuses. That would be really beneficial.
Definitely. So, a lot of these clients here, OSU has been working. We've worked with them for years and years and years. I'm not sure how much they required as much as they strongly recommend it when they send things out. State of Tennessee has written it into their, that is not supposed to be 81M. Maybe it is 81M. It feels like it should be BIM, but they've written to their standards as well. And certainly whenever we build BIM documents, we have the conversations with them to build the standards and have them sending them out to.
Well, fantastic. And please make sure, if nothing else, that you guys go on there. I'm sure you can find tons of chats that Jason has done in much more depth. If you're, particularly interested in one of the tools, maybe try to get some of those links on the mural if we can. Thank you guys so much. Before we jump into this last presentation, just a quick share on the mural with you guys here. Once again, really wonderful place for mural. If you guys have any information that you'd like to share, maybe a model checking tool that you guys have found that is really awesome, something like that. Any questions that are just general or anything that you'd like to share, you can do that once again, just by dragging over notes onto the mural canvas. It looks like a lot of you guys have been dragging some questions down for the presenters. Please continue to do that. We love that. And you can see, in addition to tons of people flying around in here, that we have a few different links over underneath of the different presentations. Next up, for our grand finale here, we have Ehsan and Japhy, which will be presenting on PyRevit and some on Rhino inside. So without further ado, hey, Ehsan, how are you?
I'm pretty
and Japhy.
Good, thank you.
Japhy's going to come in later, so I don't want to leave him out. He's going to come in a bit later. It's very good to see you, and we always love to have you as part of our BIMXT network group.
Thank you, thank you. So for PyRevit, I just wanted to share a couple of tools that are sort of like packaged with the standard tools in PyRevit. Some of them are pretty destructive, so you kind of have to watch for them and make sure to train everybody that's supposed to use them properly. But they sort of like help you if you're an architect on the project, or if you're a BIM manager on the project, BIM specialist with the responsibility of keeping the model clean, to sort of like find things and keep them organized and clean. The first thing that I wanted to show you is when you are working with collaborated models. Let's say if I'm in a 3D view and I make adjustment to this wall, there's a set of tools in here under project panel in PyRevit set of tools that's sort of like under teams that you could find answers to, like, for example, who owns that piece of element very quickly using that tool that's called Who Did That. So you could figure out who reloaded the keynotes last, and you can figure out who created the selected element. So if I have the selected element in here, and you can say who created the selected element. Now, all this information is sort of like available within the Revit API. So if you have the work sharing model enabled, let's say I'll put it on the owners, if you hover over any of the elements, you get a whole lot of this information. But sort of like those are easier tools to get access to that information very quickly. There's some other ones that are kind of handy in here, like, for example, select elements owned by me in this current view. So I can sort of like very quickly figure out how much of the content of this view I've actually touched and modified. Those are the ones that nobody else can touch because I'm the owner, and unless I synchronize and release the ownership of those elements. So those are sort of like handy tools that you might find useful. We have a couple of tools that are super helpful in keeping your model clean. There's a whole lot of scripts under inspect, under the analysis panel, that are designed to sort of like look into your model and inspect things. Like, for example, this last one is called list family sizes. I've actually ran it before because it takes a while to run, but it basically opens every Revit family that's inside this model and sort of like determines its file size, and sort of like gives you a report of all of these. So you can take a look at the size of these families that are inside your model. So I can see that it's like generic vanity, a unit bathroom that has like 3 3 megabyte or something like that. Maybe I want to take a look at this and reduce the size of this to affect the size of my model. So that's one of the things that's sort of like, you can take a look at. And there's a whole bunch of other good utilities in here as well. There is another one sort of like close to families that I actually use quite often on projects. It's called a Revit family check, a family quick check. And you can find it under project family. It's called family quick check. And what it does is basically, it's very similar to the family size checker. It opens all the files, all the families that are sort of like inside your Revit model, and makes sure that they actually open without any exceptions. This is a great tool to catch those instances of families that are corrupt in Revit model and sort of like creates a model that it can't really open, or throws a whole bunch of errors when you're opening it. So this way it goes through all the families that are inside the model. It might take a couple of minutes to finish, but it will tell you if they are sort of like valid and open with no problems. The sort of like the infamous set of wipe tools in PyRevit are pretty popular for getting your model clean. One of the ones that I wanted to show you is that, like, if I go to any of my floor plans in here, let's see, go to base floor plan, and I want to create an elevation. You all know that if you accidentally delete that elevation, the empty elevation tag will still be there because, it assumes that you might want to add elevation views to it later. One of the tools that you could use is this wipe empty elevation tags. So it goes through all your model, all your views in a model, and cleans up those empty elevation tags, and it will give you a report of how many of these elements it has actually deleted. You have sort of like along the same set of lines, you have the wipe arrowhead types. So it will show you all the arrowheads that are inside your model. If you want to clean them up, you can clean them up from here. One of the ones that are sort of like are popular is unused view filters, unused filters, and the unpurgeable viewport types. So a lot of times when you're working on a sheet like this and you place, or like this, and you place a viewport in here, you know that you have all this like do not delete or whatever the viewports that end up being duplicating themselves over here. This might have been resolved in the newer version of Revit, but it still exists in the older versions. So you get a lot of like viewport types that cannot delete. This tool, this unpurgeable viewport types, actually makes sure that they're all deleted. So on the next purge, they actually get purged out of the model. You have a wipe data schema. This is quite intrusive. No, use it only for the stuff that you know what you're doing. Like, for example, I can see that the Unify add-in has added data to this Revit model, like project ID, a whole bunch of other stuff. I might want to clean this up if I need to. That's sort of like, only use it when you know what you're doing. There's another tool for wiping the BIM 360 collaboration cache. So as you know, when you're working with a shared model that's hosted on BIM 360, when you open that model on the Revit side, Revit stores this cache in a different location, in a sort of like a standard location that's different from the sort of like the standard method of sharing Revit models over a network, right? This tool helps you clean those caches if you need to delete the cache. So if you click on it, it'll look into the cache folder. It tells you the list of projects that do have a cache, and you can select those projects and wipe the cache and open them. On the next opening of the model, it would create the new cache. Make sure you're synchronized, all that kind of stuff, so you don't have to lose any data. Another one is that's pretty useful, and I use it quite a lot. It's called wipe subcategories. Again, pretty intrusive and destructive. So you'll get a warning that, but you should be sure that you know what you're doing. But a lot of times when you actually bring a lot of families into a Revit model, they bring their own subcategories that are assigned to their geometry. And a lot of times they're duplicated and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I always do is that I make sure when I go to sort of like clean up a model, I open those Revit families that have sort of like duplicated geometry categorization and sort of like make those unified, and then get rid of all the extra ones. So if under casework, I have this base cabinet that's a duplicate and there's another base cabinet, I can actually purge that subcategory from here. So that means that in my view, in my visibility graphics, when I go under casework, I won't see duplicated subcategories listed in here, right? This is great for setting up, just cleaning this up. So setting up visibility graphics on your views a lot easier, and especially in your view templates, they're not duplicated names all over the place. And then so we got tools for selected families, wiping selected families. If you want to select a deleted family or multiple instances of families in your model, you can actually use that tool. Again, it deletes all the instances. And the last one I kind of wanted to, well, the one before last I wanted to show you is that there's a lot of times you have constraints between, lock this and create the constraint, but delete the dimension. Well, actually, hold on. Isn't it supposed to ask me? Oh, there's already in there. Anyway, so whenever you constrain something, there's a lot of times that in your Revit model, when you're playing around, you move a piece of geometry and you're like, hey, it's affecting other stuff. And you see these other constraints associated with it. And they're kind of hard to find. The newer version of Revit have added this constraint view that you can actually see all these hidden constraints. So that makes it a lot easier. But just to wipe a whole lot of these constraints, you can select a piece of geometry in Revit and say wipe attach constraints. And it would list all the constraints that are assigned to that piece of geometry, and it would delete them. So that would be a good way of sort of like disassociating this piece of geometry from anything else. So you can start setting up your constraints, fresh. And then this master wipe model component with the red icon has a whole lot of wiping tools inside it that are sort of like generally designed around when you are sending your model outside of your company, and you want to make sure that you don't include things that are, creating liability for you and all that kind of stuff. So like removing all the areas, rooms, geometries, materials, on reference views, all the views, even like a lot of times I want to send the 3D model out to somebody that's supposed to use that, for 3D printing and stuff like that. They don't need to see all the views. I can delete all the views and remove all of that from the model. This is again quite intrusive and destructive. So be careful what you use this kind of stuff for. The last one that I wanted to show you is this tool that's sort of like very similar to what was talked about the Revit model checker. The intention was sort of like to set up a similar mechanism. So you have this tool that's called pre-flight checks. If you open that, you see that there are a couple of checks sort of like placed inside of it, but there's no mechanism, there's no standardized mechanism to create these checks, right? The way you do it is that if you are a PyRevit developer and you create tools for your company, if you go under your extension, like for example, I'm using PyRevit tools extension here, you can throw a checks directory in here, and there's a series of checked Python scripts or C# scripts in here that are designed and written by you to to sort of like check your models in any way that you want them to be checked. This is actually quite helpful when you want these checks to be making calls or making adjustments to the internal APIs that you have in your company. Sort of like, anything that's sort of like, it gives you full customization over what you want to do, but there's also a lot of work that you have to sort of like do to be able to create all those checks for yourself. You have to collect the elements in your model, make sure that, the names are correct, all that kind of stuff. You have to write those checks yourself. But it gives you the ability to sort of like show those checks in the Revit UI very easily, so you can run them later. Like somebody created this model checker that you can just run the check, and it would sort of like look at your model, and it would list and report a whole bunch of things about, right? And this sort of like you can utilize the PyRevit output window, which is basically sort of like an HTML renderer, so you can have interactive charts and all that kind of stuff in here as well, showing the data that that's sort of like you're looking at in your model. So that's also a quite useful tool if you want to set up very custom checks within your PyRevit toolset. That's pretty much all I had about this, except for this last one that I forgot to mention. There are a couple of handy select tools in here as well. So when you're working in a Revit model, one of the things that I always tell the people that sort of like I used to work with and they were using PyRevit was that if you use the right tools, life is easier to make sure that the data is consistent across all the different elements that you have in the Revit model, and sort of like validating the data would be a lot easier. So one of the examples would be like, hey, if I get to select the right set of elements, like I'm here, and I want to make an adjustments to all the revision clouds that belong to a revision, but I'm on this sheet, and I know other sheets also have revision clouds related to this revision. You don't have to be active in all the sheets and open all of them to be able to make adjustments. You can just say select all clouds of a specific revision, and I'm going to click the revision. So all of those are selected. A lot of them might be on different sheets. Might not even be on this sheet that I have sort of like active. But you see that there are four, at the bottom, you see 4 of these clouds are actually selected. So some of them are on different sheets. And then I can make sure that the comment on all of these says the same thing, right? So it's a very simple thing that you just make sure that you have everything that is correct selected. So when you make the adjustment to the parameter, all of them are consistent and sort of like the same. So that's everything that I had. Japhy, if you want to jump in. And
well, one question that I have about,
so
do you have a Revit icon updater as far as PyRevit? Because I feel like everybody wants your icons, just to be real. Every time you give a presentation, somebody asks about it. So yeah, how you have the 23 and 22 and 21. I thought that you had that available.
So I believe at some point we published it. So it's under PyRevit repo. If you go under, I believe it's extras. And
I'll share the link of this.
Yeah, so I've created a whole bunch of these icons. You can just download these ICOs and assign
them.
There
we go.
And there's also an installer that's called Revit Shortcuts. You need to download the advanced installer. That's sort of like the builder for this, but there's a free version. Advanced installer, that's the application that you need to download. There's a free version of this, but then you can open this Revit shortcuts file and generate an MSI installer that installs these shortcuts on your machine. So if I go on all apps, Revit icons.
And do you support all, like the last 4 versions of Revit?
The only one that I don't have there is 2024, but all of these
are not for the icons. I'm sorry, for PyRevit.
Oh, PyRevit, yeah, PyRevit does support. I just updated the work in progress for 2024 too, but it does support the same PyRevit can run from 2017 to 2023.
Truly ahead of the game. Well, I won't take any more time of Japhy's and Rhino inside Revit, but please keep the questions coming on the mural. If we have time, we'll get to all of them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that when you think of Revit model help and management, you don't really think of Rhino or Rhino inside, but more and more model health is about your data health and being able to validate and know what your data is and be able to manipulate that. So in this quick example, we have a coordination model that has a number of references. And what I'm going to do is, so ideally, you're going to use either Dynamo, PyRevit, Rhino inside Revit for like your rapid application development. Maybe you don't want to make all your schedules. You don't want to flip in between all this stuff. Eventually, maybe you'll make a PyRevit tool, but maybe you don't know how to code. So this is going to be a quick way to kind of flush these things out. So I'm just going to run over this real quick. This is the Revit query links. So I'm getting all the categories for each one for the pipes. And then I'm making a rule-based filter, just like you would with a filtered element collector in PyRevit. So I could test the type description is a pipe. And in this project, they all happen to equal the pipe, but you could test if there was nulls and then do something. So then that creates a filter of the pipe categories for each individual reference and unions those filters and gets all the elements. So those are only available in 4 of the documents. And what I'm doing here is gathering all the types. And so in this case, maybe I wanted to put a type comment on all those various types and all these projects. So we end up with these four projects with these types, and I'm feeding the element ID and the project name into a data output component. So that way I have another file that has all four of those documents open. I get the document IDs that I pulled from the other file, and then organize them into the same order. So I have mechanical, plumbing, fire protection, and then I reference those actual elements and then actually do something, which is in this case is change the parameter to the file name, so that maybe I wanted to make a filter in the coordination file that referenced this parameter and do a quick color. And it's a dynamic live document. So if we search for something else in here, it would you could quickly change all four different reference files. Just one instance of manipulating data, being able to check your data. Rhino inside Revit is available on rhino3d.com. It's just a Grasshopper plugin. You can get it and it gets started. And then there's also a guide that's probably going to give you more about Revit than you've ever wanted to know. So it's a great way to get started in the Revit API, as well as kind of visual scripting and maybe eventually programming. So
That was fantastic. And I feel like as the Dynamo girl, of course, I don't think about Rhino inside Revit for model management and model checking, but that, I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? We're just data validating at the end of the day, right? And creating reports and looking at it somehow.
exactly.
So that's fantastic.
There's some potential coming with Rhino 8. We have some good tools for shrink wrapping geometry. So I could see in the future being able to identify those bad families when on those gigabyte projects that have a number of mechanical stuff imported, being able to actually change that geometry, create a new family that would be similar but lightweight. So
yeah, right. When you find that manufacturer elevator that's taking up half of your model size, right? You can actually do something about it.
Exactly. And then this is a user-driven project, so it's we're adding stuff weekly. So if anybody has anything they want to see in there or any questions, feel free to reach out either on the forum or email us, and we'll get it in there.
And this link, just like all other links, of course, are up on the mural. So please check that out per usual. And we definitely have some questions. We have a few minutes left before we punt everybody out of the meeting, because we definitely respect your time and appreciate that this is an hour. But I feel like there have been a lot of questions surrounding, the IT perspective around Rhino, or I'm sorry, PyRevit. Ehsan, would you talk to a little bit about that? About first off, how we maybe can minimize what tools people get, and then the IT perspective of security and all of those good things.
Yeah. So
this as much as you want to talk about it.
Yeah. So actually, let me quickly share my screen. The thing that I was talking about in the comments that I was making on those questions. The PyRevit repo. This is sort of like a little bit more involved process, but PyRevit repo has the source of everything that's in there, right? All the tools that you're seeing in the Revit UI here, as part of the standard PyRevit tools, are under extensions, PyRevit tools.extension. And sort of like the architecture is designed, the hierarchy is designed that every directory represents a UI element. So this is a tab, and these are the panels. So if I want to remove that wipe tool, I would go in here to project panel, and I'll delete this wipe pull down button, and it will go away from the UI next time you launch Revit, right? The thing is that you kind of want to get to a point that you create an installer for this. And I'll actually commented that I'm going to make a guide on PyRevit Wiki about this. All the installer files are under release, so you could go in here and open this PyRevit admin. Where is it? Where are you? there we go, PyRevit admin.iss. And this is the Inno setup maker file. So it's a very, very tiny free software that you download, and it opens these files, these scripts, just like it's shown on this side here. This is script, and this script tells it where to pull everything from. So it tells it that, hey, go grab all the things that are inside that tools extension. But since you have already modified it, you would build an installer that's modified and sort of like includes the tools that you want it to do. And it takes only a second for this to grab all those tools, generate the installer. These are the files that actually the PyRevit, sort of like the, what you call it, the continuous improvement, continuous build, the CI/CD system, automatically uses to generate the installers that you can download from here. These installers that you can download, or the installers that are available on the release, they're all generated using the same installer. So if you do clone the PyRevit repo, you can make all the customizations that you want. I'll make a guide about this to make this a little easier. And if you generate that .exe, the installer, or .msi on your machine, I'm hoping that there would be less of a security threat prompts and stuff like that from your security software. A lot of the security prompts that you get from these softwares is because every time I generate a new installer for PyRevit, these security applications haven't seen it before. So they generally flag it as something they haven't seen. A lot of times there's really no issues with it. Sometimes people email me about like viruses attached to these installers and stuff like that. These installers are generated on a sort of like a very isolated GitHub runner that doesn't have any viruses or anything on it. Every time sort of like a new installer is being generated, that runner is actually run the first time and it's created the first time. So they're super clean. I've tested if you go under releases and if you test these installers, the URL installers with any of these online security checks, they won't give you anything. But sometimes when you actually install it on your machine and move it around and stuff like that, something gets attached to it because that system might be not as clean as you might think. So these are sort of like the general issues that I've seen and I've heard about. I feel like the customization could be fairly done easily with generating a new installer for yourself.
So even if I wanted to be able to give, everybody at Smith Group 5 of the PyRevit tools, I could easily just parse down that install, remove all of the pieces that I don't want to just the pieces that I want, and then push that out.
Yeah, and to make that life easier, if you hold Alt when you're in Revit and click on any of these buttons, like I want to see, let's say the pre-flight checks. Let's say you don't want them to have this. I'm going to Alt click on this. It'll take you to that directory. It'll open Windows Explorer and it will take you to that directory. So sometimes the name of this bundle might not exactly match the name that you see in the UI. So that makes it very easy to just find those. And I can just delete that one. And the next time I load it, PyRevit flights won't be there. Sometimes to get the orders right, just if you see these bundle YAML files, take a look at those. They might have that bundle listed to set the order. So you might have to delete it from there too, but they're not super, super important. Generally, PyRevit should be able to understand that that doesn't exist, so it doesn't create it there. Or even if you want to change the sort of like the layout of these, like these three placed inside a stack, these three push buttons, you can just copy them and paste them in here and delete your stack. So they wouldn't be three big buttons right beside each other instead of sort of like placed inside a stack. I'll make sure I have a decent guide on this on the PyRevit wiki. And if you want to know more about that, it is on the wiki, pyrevitlabs.io. And sort of like that's the documentation for everything that we have in PyRevit.
And I have that link, of course, in the mural.
Thank you.
No, thank you guys all so much. We didn't even just have 4 ways of model checking. We gave a bonus one with Rhino inside Revit. We have 5 ways of model checking. So really fantastic. We got bonus one there at the end with Japhy. So thank you all so much for coming today. Please make sure you fill out the survey, which is in the top left corner of the mural. Also, free stuff, apparently Dan is pointing to in the mural. You get all of his files. If you double click on that link, which I've also put under his questions for presenter 1 area. So please make sure you go and grab his files. Ehsan is fantastic. Even all of his code with PyRevit is amazingly annotated. Use the Discord, use the forums. He's really fantastic. Japhy's fantastic. So thank you guys all so much. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you next month.